come here tonight with the assumption that the murderer is always the other, the monster, the aberration, the one who carries a darkness you could never imagine in yourself. But let me tell you, the most terrifying truth is not that there are murderers in our world. The most terrifying truth is that the murderer is hidden within the ordinary man. The neighbor who waves each morning, the father who tucks his child into bed, the woman who carries groceries home from the market. The shadow of murder lives not at the margins of humanity, but at its very core, and the question that must disturb your sleep is not, why do murderers exist, but why do ordinary people become them? The human psyche is not a simple machine of reason. It is a deep cavern, a labyrinth filled with symbols, archetypes, fears, and unspeakable desire. You may live by daylight, but the night lives inside you. The shadow is that part of you that you refuse to acknowledge, the impulses you push away, the hatred you deny, the envy you disguise with smiles. Yet the shadow does not disappear. What is repressed grows stronger. What is denied gains power. The man who insists he has no anger is the man most possessed when anger erupts, and the society that insists it is civilized may, in a single spark of chaos, dissolve into bloodshed. Let me show you with a vision from the unconscious, for the psyche often reveals its truth through dreams before it enacts them in reality. A man, outwardly respectable, father of two, an accountant who pays his taxes, begins to dream. Each night he dreams of a figure in black. It does not speak, it does not move, it simply stands in the corner of his dream. Each night it is closer. The first time it is across the street. The second time it is at the window. The third time it is standing at the foot of his bed. He wakes, drenched in sweat, telling himself it is only a dream. But in truth, the dream is the psyche's way of revealing what the conscious ego refuses to see. A growing, unacknowledged rage, a hatred born of years of humiliation, jealousy, and silent despair. The dream is the shadow announcing itself. Weeks pass, his life continues. He greets his colleagues with polite smiles, yet within, the figure in black grows heavier, pressing against his ribs. One evening, when insulted by a stranger in a bar, the figure steps forward. He strikes. The blow is harder than he imagined he was capable of. The man falls. Blood spreads across the floor. The accountant stands over him, trembling, both horrified and liberated, as though a second self has finally been born. The dream has crossed into reality. The shadow has acted, and the ordinary man has become a murderer. Do you see now? The murderer is not born in the act of violence. The murderer was already alive in the dream, in the repression, in the unspoken fantasies. It is only when the shadow is denied, when the conscious self clings to the illusion of purity, that the unconscious erupts with such force Civilization is not the absence of barbarity. Civilization is only the fragile dam holding back the flood of the unconscious. And every dam, given time, begins to crack. What frightens you most is not the criminal in chains. What frightens you most is the recognition that his face is a mirror. The same archetypes that move in him move also in you. The archetype of the predator, the warrior, the avenger, they are part of the collective unconscious inherited from the dawn of humanity. You may believe yourself a creature of peace, yet within you lives the hunter who once stalked the mammoth, the warrior who once split skulls with stone axes, the tribesman who once offered human sacrifices to the gods. These images live on not as dusty memories, but as living impulses waiting for their chance to emerge. And so we must ask, what awakens them? What transforms the father into the killer, the mother into the destroyer, the youth into the terrorist? It is when the conscious ego grows too thin, when the pressure of the unconscious becomes unbearable, when the dream is ignored and the archetype seizes control, we think of possession as a phenomenon of demons. But I tell you, the psyche is filled with its own demons, and they are far more dangerous than anything conjured in myths. To be possessed by the shadow is to act without knowing why, to strike with a hand that feels both yours and not yours, to wake after the act with the terror of realizing you have crossed the threshold from which there is no return. You recoil at the thought of murderers because you believe you are not them. But that belief is the first illusion. Every human has a shadow. The only difference is whether the shadow is acknowledged or denied. The murderer is often the one who has most vehemently denied his shadow, who has lived a life of apparent respectability while the unconscious gathered power in silence. When the eruption comes, it is catastrophic. Consider also the collective shadow, the unconscious, not of one man, but of an entire people. A crowd, when seized by rage, can lynch, burn, slaughter, not because each individual is uniquely evil, but because the collective shadow has been unleashed. The most peaceful citizen standing in a crowd can become a beast. History is filled with massacres committed not by criminals, but by ordinary men, who in the fever of collective possession became executioners. The shadow, multiplied by thousands, becomes a tidal wave that sweeps away reason and decency. And this is why I say the line between the ordinary man and the murderer is thinner than you dare admit. You may cling to the illusion of innocence, but innocence is fragile, and under the right conditions, it shatters. The murderer's shadow is your shadow. His dream is your dream. His archetype is your archetype. To understand the murderer is to confront yourself. Do you feel the unease rising within you now? That unease is the recognition of truth. The psyche trembles when it hears its secret spoken aloud. Tonight, I ask you not to look away. Tonight, I ask you to hold the gaze of the shadow and admit there is a murderer within me. Only then does transformation begin. Only then can the shadow be integrated not through denial, but through acceptance, through the difficult work of bringing darkness into consciousness. Because the danger is not that you have a shadow. The danger is that you refuse to see it. And what is unseen always acts with the greatest power. The shadow alone does not explain why entire nations march to slaughter, why men strap bombs to their bodies, why women poison in secret, why the apparently sane speak with the voice of destiny as they kill. To understand this, we must step deeper into the psychic underworld, into the archetypes. Archetypes are the primal patterns of the human psyche, the inherited blueprints of behavior, the mythic roles that all men and women carry within. They are older than your name, older than your culture, older even than your civilization. And when an archetype seizes a person, he does not merely act, he enacts a myth. He becomes a character in a story far larger than himself, a story whose roots stretch back to the dawn of mankind. Among these archetypes is the hero, noble in its essence. The hero archetype drives men to face danger, to conquer obstacles, to sacrifice for others, but like all forces of the psyche, it has its shadow. When distorted, the hero becomes the destroyer. When inflated by unconscious power, the hero believes he is chosen, that his violence is not cruelty but destiny. And so the archetype that once defended life becomes the archetype that annihilates it. Imagine a young man, restless, filled with nameless rage and longing. He grows up in a society fractured, whispering promises of redemption through sacrifice. He feels insignificant, unseen, a shadow in the crowd. But one night he dreams of standing on a battlefield, a sword in his hand, flames consuming the horizon. He hears a voice declare, "You are chosen. You are the warrior who will cleanse the world." He wakes trembling, not with fear but with purpose. The dream is not his alone. It is the hero archetype speaking through him, seizing his unconscious, dressing his emptiness with mythic fire. In the months that follow, he falls under the sway of an ideology that confirms his dream. They tell him he is indeed a warrior, that his sacrifice will make him immortal, that his violence will purify the world. He accepts, he straps explosive to his body, walking calmly into a crowd. When he detonates, the archetype has triumphed. Hades, and with him dozens of others, because he believed he was not merely a man but a myth. And the chilling truth is that in that moment, he was not simply acting as himself, he was acting as an archetype of the collective unconscious, as old as humanity itself. Do you see? Murder is not always born of hatred. Sometimes it is born of meaning. Sometimes it is the twisted offspring of the need for purpose, the hunger to live a mythic life. And herein lies the danger. When society denies its youth a healthy way to embody the archetype of the hero, the archetype will find a distorted way to live itself. If you do not integrate your myth will possess you. But let us go deeper still, for the archetype of the hero is not the only one that murders. There is the avenger who embodies justice so absolutely that he becomes injustice. There is the lover who clings so desperately that he destroys the one he cannot release. There is the ruler who seeks order so obsessively that he slaughters all who oppose him. Each archetype, when inflated by unconscious forces, has the potential to murder, and each of you carries these within you, like seeds that may sprout when watered by suffering, humiliation, or fanaticism. You may wonder, why do archetypes have such power over us? Because they are not inventions of the conscious mind, they are the bones of the psyche. They rise from the collective unconscious, that deep ocean of symbols that unites all of humanity beneath the surface of individuality. You think yourself unique, but your soul is woven from the same mythic threads as every other soul. This is why different cultures across the earth tell the same stories, why the same symbols appear in dreams across centuries. And this is why violence, when it erupts, often takes on the same mythic form. The murderer believes he is acting alone, but in truth, he is acting out an ancient script, one that has been written in the depths of the unconscious since the beginning. When an ordinary man becomes a murderer, it is rarely because he suddenly decided to kill. More often, it is because he was seized by an archetype that convinced him he was not killing but fulfilling destiny. And when the archetype possesses, it is like a god speaking through him. His eyes change, his voice deepens. He acts with conviction, he feels no doubt, no hesitation. And afterward, when the act is done, when the blood has dried, he looks upon his hands and wonders, was that truly me? It was him, and yet more than him. It was the ancient shadow of the collective enacted through his fragile body. The greatest danger for modern man is not that he has a shadow, not that he dreams of murder, not even that he carries archetypes of destruction. The greatest danger is that he believes he is rational, civilised, immune. This illusion blinds him to the tidal forces within. When reason denies the irrational does not vanish. It waits, it grows, it finds cracks, and one day it bursts forth with a violence that shatters the very illusion of civilization. This is why I say to you, look not only at the murderer in prison, but also at the murderer in myth, the murderer in dream, the murderer in the depths of your own unconscious. Ask yourself, what archetype possesses me? Which shadow walks my nights? Which story am I unknowingly living? For if you do not ask, you risk becoming its victim, and worse, its instrument. The young man who dreams of being chosen, who wakes believing himself a warrior, he is not so different from you. His hunger for meaning is your hunger. His need to be seen is your need. His longing for transcendence is your longing. The difference is only that his unconscious seized him before he could seize it. And so the archetype used him as a vessel, and his life ended in fire and blood. The chilling truth then is this: murder is not always committed by monsters. It is committed by men and women who believed they were living a sacred story, And that is why ordinary people become killers, not because they are devoid of humanity, but because they are too human, too vulnerable to the mythic forces within. If the archetypes give murder its mythic justification, then dreams often give it its private rehearsal. Dreams are not mere illusions of the night. They are messages from the unconscious, coded in symbols, drenched in fear, longing, and prophecy. They whisper of what lies beneath the thin mask of civility. To ignore them is to let the darkness gather unnoticed until one day it bursts forth in blood. Consider a man whose life appears to be a monotony of routine. He rises at dawn, commutes to work, greets his colleagues with courteous nods, returns home to eat a modest dinner. No one suspects that each night he is transported into a labyrinth. In his dream, he walks endless corridors of stone. The walls are damp, the air heavy. Always, in the center of the maze, there is a sound, the slithering of a serpent. He tries to escape, but each corridor bends him back toward the same chamber. And when he enters, the serpent waits, coiled, its eyes like molten fire. Sometimes it speaks in hisses he cannot understand. Sometimes it lunges, sinking its fangs into his flesh. He wakes gasping, the taste of venom in his mouth, the terror clinging like a second skin. At first, he tells no one. He fears they will laugh, that they will dismiss it as fantasy. But he begins to notice its effects in the daylight world. He grows restless. His patience shrinks. He hears whispers in silence, sees shadows move where none should. The serpent, once confined to the labyrinth of his dream, begins to stalk the corridors of his waking life. He feels watched, pursued, hunted by something that both terrifies and fascinates him. Weeks pass, and his dreams intensify. Now he sees not only the serpent, but faces of people he knows. They merge with the creature, their eyes gleaming with accusation. He begins to believe that the serpent demands a sacrifice, and then one evening, walking home, a man brushed past him, careless, muttering something dismissive. In that instant, the labyrinth floods into reality. He sees not a passerby, but the serpent itself. The compulsion seizes him. He follows the man into a dark alley. Minutes later, there is blood on his hands. He has slain not the man, but the serpent. He could not escape. At least, that is how his psyche explains it. In truth, the serpent was his own shadow. His repressed fury and resentment projected outward until it demanded embodiment in flesh. Do you see how chilling this is? The dream was not simply a warning. It was a rehearsal. Each night, the unconscious practiced what the conscious mind would not permit. And when the conditions aligned, the dream broke through. The labyrinth became the city streets. The serpent became the stranger. The murder became the only way the psyche could release its unbearable tension. This is why I insist, pay attention to your dreams. they are not meaningless. They are the stage on which the unconscious plays out its dramas, often long before they spill into action. The murderer often begins his crime in sleep, but notice something else. The dream did not invent the serpent, it revealed it. The serpent is one of humanity's oldest archetypal symbols. Across cultures, it represents temptation, transformation, danger, and the unconscious itself. In mythology, the serpent guards treasure, knowledge, or death. In this man's dream, the serpent symbolized the forbidden rage he carried within. The labyrinth was his psyche, a maze he could not escape because he had never dared to face its center. And the act of killing was his desperate attempt to conquer what could never truly be conquered in blood. How many of you have dismissed your dreams as nonsense? How many have ignored recurring symbols that haunt you in the night? That dismissal is dangerous. For what is ignored by the conscious ego finds other ways to express itself. Sometimes it emerges in neurosis, in anxiety, in obsessive thoughts. Sometimes it emerges in compulsions you cannot explain, and in the darkest cases, it emerges in acts of violence where the dream is reenacted in the waking world with devastating consequences. The ordinary man, when he dreams of killing, often recoils upon waking. He says, "I would never do such a thing." But the psyche whispers, "The dream already did." And if he does not confront the meaning, the symbolism, the shadow behind the dream, he risks letting the dream drive him like an unseen hand. In prisons, when I have spoken to murderers, I have asked them of their dreams. Many confess that long before the act, they were haunted by visions of blood, of faceless figures, of being hunted or hunting. Some even felt relief after the crime, as though a script had finally been completed. It is as if their unconscious had written the play, and the murder was the final scene. Inevitable. Once the curtain had risen, do you understand now? The murderer's dream is not alien to you. You too dream of symbols you cannot explain, of corridors, serpents, strangles, of violence or fear. The only difference is whether you face them or whether you let them fester in silence. The murderer is often one who did not face them, who allowed the dream to take command. He is not wholly other. He is you. Had you walked further down the path of denial, the serpent in the labyrinth, the figure in the black coat, the faceless mob, all are images from the collective unconscious, shared by humanity, and they will appear in dream after dream, century after century, until men learn not merely to flee them, but to integrate them, to acknowledge them, to hold their gaze. For until then, the unconscious will continue to find its release in blood. And so I tell you, listen to your dreams. Do not dismiss them, for in them you may glimpse the shadow that waits. And if you confront it in the dream, if you wrestle with it in consciousness, you may save yourself and others from wrestling with it. In reality, we have spoken of the shadow of archetypes, of dreams. But now we must peel away yet another mask. The persona is the face you show the world, the carefully crafted mask of respectability, charm, and order. Without it, society would collapse into chaos. For the persona allows you to interact, to belong, to function. But the danger is this: the persona, when mistaken for the true self, becomes a prison. Behind the smiling mask, the shadow grows monstrous. And when the mask cracks, the eruption shocks not only the world, but the bearer himself. Imagine, then, a man of prestige, a financier of impeccable reputation. His voice is calm, his words measured, his presence commanding. He donates to charities, attends galas, shakes hands with mayors and priests. To the outside world, he is a man of trust, a pillar of society. Yet late at night, in the hidden corners of his study, he paints. The canvases are grotesque, figures with hollow eyes, mouths twisted into screams, bodies torn apart by invisible claws. He hides them from his family, ashamed, yet compelled. These paintings are the mirror of his unconscious, the unfiltered voice of his shadow. They tell the truth. His persona denies, years pass, and his fraud grows. He builds empires of lies, manipulating accounts, stealing fortunes. Each day he wears the mask of dignity, while at night his canvases grow more violent, more surreal. The persona grows brighter, the shadow darker, until one day, when the fraud unravels, when investigators close in, the mask shatters. He does not surrender with dignity. He descends into madness. A colleague confronts him, and in that instant, the suppressed fury of decades erupts. He strangles the man with his own hands. In court, his paintings are revealed as chilling prophecies, visual confessions of the murderer that had always lived behind the mask. Do you see the pattern? The persona deceives not only society, but the bearer. The more polished the mask, the more neglected the inner truth. The murderer behind the persona is not born suddenly. He has been whispering in hidden paintings, in secret writings, in private compulsions. The mask only delays the inevitable, and when the collapse comes, it is catastrophic. Because the man does not merely commit crime, he becomes the very opposite of the identity he has displayed. The banker becomes the thief, the philanthropist becomes the killer, the respected father becomes the destroyer of life. You may think yourself safe because your persona is intact. You wear the smile, you fulfill the roles expected of you. But if you believe the persona is who you are, then you are already in danger. The persona is not the self, it is only the costume, and the self raw, hungry, filled with shadow, demands recognition. When it is denied, it finds other ways, sometimes through art, sometimes through secret addictions, sometimes through violence. The mask may fool your neighbors, but it cannot fool the unconscious. That is why I tell you, beware of masks that shine too brightly. Beware of the man who insists too loudly on his purity, his virtue, his control. Often behind such perfection lies a chaos, untamed. The persona is necessary, but it must be porous. It must allow the self to breathe, to express, to integrate. Otherwise, it becomes not a mask, but a tomb, and the self bursts forth in rebellion, destroying both mask and man alike. The murderer within the persona is perhaps the most unsettling of all, because he lives so close to you. You may work beside him, dine with him, even love him, never suspecting what lies beneath. But the signs are there. If you look, the hidden obsession, the disturbing art, the nervous laughter when violence is mentioned, the compulsion to control every perception, these are cracks in the mask, whispers of the shadow beneath. And when the mask shatters, you will say, I never would have believed it of him. Yet the truth is that the persona was always only a costume. The self, denied for too long, finally claimed its due. And what of you? What mask do you wear? What parts of yourself do you exile into secrecy? What art do you hide? What fantasies do you deny? What rage do you swallow behind a smile? Do not imagine you are immune. The persona is universal, and the danger is not in having it, but in forgetting that you are more than it. To forget is to risk possession. To deny is to invite eruption. To cling too tightly to the mask is to feed the murderer in the dark. Remember the banker and his grotesque paintings. Remember the mask that fooled the world but could not fool his own psyche. Remember that the murderer does not arrive suddenly like lightning from nowhere. He is grown slowly, in secrecy, in repression, behind the mask of the ordinary. And when the mask breaks, the horror is not that the man has changed, but that the man has revealed what he always was. If the persona hides the murderer behind the mask, then the collective unconscious multiplies him into thousands. You see, what you repress individually is dangerous, but what humanity represses collectively becomes catastrophic. The collective unconscious is the great ocean beneath all individual minds, the repository of humanity's archetypes, instincts, and myths. It binds us together in invisible threads. And when the collective shadow is unleashed, it does not manifest as one murderer, but as a mob. And the mob is always more terrifying than the lone killer. Picture this: a city in turmoil, whispers of betrayal spreading through the streets, a spark of outrage igniting. At first, people gather to protest. They shout, they wave signs, they demand justice. Each man believes he is simply expressing his opinion, his frustration, his righteous anger. But as night falls, something shifts. The air thickens with primal energy. The individual egos dissolve suddenly. The crowd no longer feels like citizens. It feels like a single organism, a beast with one heartbeat, one voice. A window shatters, a store is looted, a chant becomes a howl, and then, without warning, the mob turns predatory. A man accused of betrayal is dragged into the street. The crowd encircles him, eyes glazed, teeth bared, hands grasping. They no longer see a man, they see a symbol, the embodiment of everything they fear and despise. And as they strike him, as fists and boots descend, they are no longer themselves. They are possessed by the collective shadow, the ancient archetype of the pack. The predator, when he lies lifeless, blood soaking the stones, they do not feel guilt. They feel triumph. They feel purged, united, cleansed. Yet afterward, as daylight returns, many will whisper in horror, "I do not know what came over me. I would never have done it alone." And yet they did, because the unconscious did not act alone. It acted through the many. This is the terrible mystery of the collective unconscious. The individual may resist, may cling to reason, may hesitate, but in the mob, the unconscious speaks louder than reason. The archetype of the hunter awakens, and men who yesterday cradled children in their arms today crush skulls beneath their feet. Women who yesterday prayed for peace today shout for blood. The mask of civilization is ripped away in an instant. And what emerges is older than history, older than law, the primal hunger of the tribe. Do you see now why ordinary people become murderers? Alone. They may never cross the threshold, but when the collective shadow rises, it gives them permission. It whispers, "You are not responsible. You are part of something greater." This is not murder. This is justice, purification, survival. And under this possession, the hand that strikes does not feel like yours. It feels like the hand of the crowd, the hand of history, the hand of destiny. And so you strike and strike again until the deed is done, the riot, the pogrom, the genocide. These are not anomalies. They are eruptions of the collective unconscious. They remind us that beneath the veneer of civilization lies a beast that has never truly been tamed. Each generation believes it is immune, that it has evolved beyond barbarity, and each generation, in its time, proves itself wrong. The unconscious waits patiently, and when conditions are ripe, economic collapse, political upheaval, the rhetoric of fear, it emerges, and the ordinary man becomes executioner once more. But the horror is not only in what is done, it is in the aftershock, the silence, the return to normalcy. The same men and women who tore flesh from bone yesterday will return to their homes, kiss their children, resume their routines. They will suppress the memory, insisting it was not truly them, but the psyche remembers. The blood lives in their dreams, and the cycle of repression begins again until the shadow demands release once more. What lesson must you take from this? That you are not separate from the mob, that you too are vulnerable to its possession. You may imagine yourself rational, immune, too enlightened to join in, but the collective unconscious is older than your intellect. When the crowd surges, when its chant echoes, when its rage electrifies the air, you may find your body moving before your reason catches up, and in that moment, you will not feel like yourself. You will feel like something greater, something ancient, something unstoppable. That is the danger. The only defense is consciousness, to know that the crowd has a soul and that its soul is dark, to resist not only the voice of others, but the voice that rises within when you are surrounded, to refuse the illusion that the collective act absolves you of individual guilt, to remember that the blood you shed will stain not only history, but your own unconscious, your own dreams, your own descendants who inherit the trauma. For the collective unconscious is not only shared across people, it is shared across generations. The sins of the fathers live in the dreams of the children. So I tell you this, the murderer is not always alone in the alley. Sometimes the murderer is the crowd in the square. Sometimes the shadow wears 1,000 faces. And when you ask how ordinary people become killers, look not only at the solitary man in his cell, but at the mob in the street. For the mob is nothing more than a multitude of ordinary people possessed by the same shadow that sleeps in you. We have walked through shadow, through archetypes, through dreams, through the persona, and through the terrifying eruptions of the collective unconscious. And now you may feel the weight of inevitability, as if the murderer within cannot be escaped, as if humanity is doomed to repeat its cycles of blood. But this is not the end of the story, for the same Psyche that hides the murderer also hides the healer, the redeemer, the possibility of transformation. The shadow is not only destruction, it is also the gateway to awakening. If you dare to face it, you must understand, the unconscious does not demand murder. It demands recognition. Murder erupts only when recognition is denied, when the darkness festers unacknowledged until it bursts. But if you turn toward the shadow, if you admit its presence, if you give it a voice in consciousness, then its power is transmuted. What once drove a man to kill can drive another man to create, to heal, to protect. The energy is the same. It is the direction that changes. Imagine the same man haunted by the figure in black at the foot of his bed. If he denies it, it may one day size him in violence. But if he confronts it, if he asks, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" the dream shifts. The figure may still terrify him, but by facing it, he claims the energy it holds. He may discover that the figure represents his anger, his grief, his longing for freedom, and by integrating it, he no longer needs to act it out in blood. He has brought it into consciousness, and consciousness transforms. So too with the man of the labyrinth and the serpent. If he had dared to explore the meaning of his dream, to speak of it, to paint it, to analyze it, he may have discovered that the serpent was his own repressed fury, his own vitality, twisted by denial. By naming it, he could have freed it. By embracing it, he could have lived more fully without killing, but he did not, and so the serpent devoured him in waking life. Do you see? The murderer is not destiny. The murderer is the warning of what happens when you refuse your inner truth. The only salvation is consciousness, not denial, not repression, not pretending to be pure, but the difficult, terrifying, humbling act of saying, yes, I too have rage, I too have hatred, I too have the capacity for destruction. Only then can you choose not to enact it. Only then can you live beyond it. And what of the mob? The collective shadow. How can humanity resist the possession of the crowd? Only by cultivating consciousness, not only in individuals but in communities, by teaching men and women to recognize the archetypes that move through them, by admitting that every society carries within it the seeds of violence, and that rituals of acknowledgement, confession, and integration are essential. Without such rituals, the collective shadow waits, and when it rises, history repeats itself in massacre after massacre. Civilization without consciousness is only a mask, fragile and temporary. But civilization, with consciousness civilization that admits its shadow, has the possibility of enduring. You ask me, then what is to be done? You must begin with yourself. Tonight, do not leave this hall pretending that you are untouched by darkness. Look into your dreams. Study your fantasies. Pay attention to the art you create in secret. The thoughts you are ashamed to admit. Ask yourself, what am I hiding? What am I denying? Do not wait until the shadow acts for you. Meet it now, while you still have the chance to choose. And when you see violence in the world, when you see the murderer in chains, the terrorist on trial, the mob in the street, do not say, that is not me. Say instead, that could be me. Had my shadow been stronger, had my dreams been ignored, had my archetypes possessed me. For this humility is the beginning of wisdom. Only those who admit their darkness are capable of true light. The ordinary man becomes a murderer, not because he is a monster, but because he is human. And the ordinary man can resist becoming a murderer only by becoming more fully human, by embracing his wholeness. Shadow and all, the goal is not to be innocent. The goal is to be conscious. Innocence is fragile. Consciousness endures. And so I leave you with this truth. Within each of you lives both the murderer and the healer, the destroyer and the creator, the shadow and the light. You cannot kill the shadow. You cannot exile it. You can only integrate it. And when you do, you will find that the very energy that once threatened to destroy you becomes the force that gives you life. That is the Jungian truth. That is the path to awakening. That is the only way humanity can escape its endless dance with blood. So tonight, when you close your eyes, do not fear the dream. Enter it, walk the labyrinth, face the serpent. Speak to the figure in black, ask what it wants, and listen, for if you listen deeply enough, you may find that the murderer within you does not seek murder at all. It seeks your recognition. It seeks to be seen, and when you see it, when you hold its gaze, you will discover not only why ordinary people turn into murderers, but also how ordinary people may yet turn into something far greater.